Dr. Emma Taylor adjusted her glasses. The fluorescent lights glinted off the polished surface. Her breath caught in her chest. Excitement warred with trepidation. Today was the day. The culmination of years of research. Today, her experiment began. The facility was sterile, cold, a monument to scientific curiosity. 5 rooms, each a self-contained unit. No windows, no contact with the outside world, only the cold, unblinking eye of the camera, observing, recording. The goal: to study the effects of prolonged isolation on the human psyche, to understand the unraveling of the mind in the face of nothingness, to peer into the abyss of loneliness and document its echoes. Dr. Taylor straightened her lab coat, a nervous gesture she wasn't aware of. The weight of 5 lives rested on her shoulders, 5 souls about to embark on a journey into the darkest recesses of their own minds. A journey she orchestrated. 5 volunteers, 5 strangers, each lured by the siren call of scientific exploration, or perhaps the promise of a hefty sum upon completion. Each with their own story, their own demons lurking beneath the surface. There was Mark, the stoic writer, hoping to find inspiration in the silence. Sarah, the aspiring artist, seeking to tap into the wellspring of creativity within. John, the retired soldier, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. Emily, the grieving mother, yearning for respite from the world's harsh realities. And David, the enigmatic scientist, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, even at the cost of his own sanity. The rules were simple, yet absolute. 30 days in isolation, no contact with the outside world, no communication with each other, their only companions, the bare necessities for survival, and a journal to chronicle their experiences, their thoughts, their fears. Each participant entered their assigned room, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind them. A finality that hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like a shroud. The isolation experiment had begun. The first few days passed with predictable monotony. The journals reflected a mixture of boredom, frustration, and a surprising amount of hope. The participants documented their daily routines, their thoughts on the experiment, their observations of their surroundings. Mark wrote about the stories swirling in his head, finally given space to breathe. Sarah sketched portraits of the shadows that danced in the corners of her room. John meticulously detailed his exercise regimen, clinging to the familiar structure of military life. Emily poured her grief onto the pages, finding solace in the act of writing itself. And David, ever the scientist, meticulously recorded his psychological and physiological responses, his curiosity outweighing any discomfort. Dr. Taylor and her team monitored the experiment around the clock. Cameras captured every move, every expression. Sensors tracked vital signs. The data poured in, a constant stream of information, painting a picture of the human psyche under duress. As the days bled into nights, a subtle shift occurred. The initial excitement waned. The novelty of isolation wore thin, revealing the raw, unsettling truth beneath. Loneliness began to seep into their carefully constructed worlds, like water seeping into a sinking ship. Day 11. The first report of something strange. It came from Sarah. A note scribbled in her journal, her usually elegant script now jagged and rushed.
The pipes are whispering my name.
Dr. Taylor, initially dismissive, reviewed the footage. The room was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system. A logical explanation. Yet, a seed of unease had been planted. The next day, John reported hearing faint music, a haunting melody that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Again, the cameras and microphones picked up nothing.
Something is watching me.
Dr. Taylor began to question her own certainty. Was it possible the isolation was beginning to affect her team as well? Then came Mark's journal entry.
Something is watching me.
The words, scrawled in large, frantic letters, sent a chill down Dr. Taylor's spine. The accompanying video footage showed nothing amiss. Mark sat on his cot, staring at the far wall, his eyes wide with a primal fear that couldn't be faked. The whispers, the music, the feeling of being watched, isolated incidents, easily dismissed under normal circumstances. But within the confines of the isolation experiment, they took on a sinister significance. The line between reality and delusion was blurring, and Dr. Taylor was starting to wonder if she had crossed it. The atmosphere within the facility shifted. A palpable tension hung in the air, a suffocating blanket of dread.
The once sterile environment felt tainted, infected by the unseen force that was unraveling the minds of the participants within.
The journals became increasingly erratic. Coherent sentences gave way to rambling thoughts, paranoid delusions, and desperate pleas for release.
I wrote of shadows stretching out from the corners, morphing into grotesque figures that whispered my deepest fears.
My regimented schedule devolved into a series of nonsensical rituals. I was convinced I was being tested by an unseen enemy.
My grief transformed into a chilling delusion. I believed my deceased child was trapped within the walls, calling out to me.
David, once the epitome of scientific detachment, began to exhibit signs of paranoia. He covered the camera lens with tape, claiming it was a tool of surveillance used by an unknown entity.
His journal entries became a jumbled mess of equations and diagrams, seemingly attempting to decode a hidden message within the structure of the facility itself.
The boundaries of the experiment were dissolving. The isolation, intended as a controlled variable, had mutated into something insidious, something that defied explanation.
Dr. Taylor, once confident and in control, found herself teetering on the precipice of an abyss of her own.
The experiment was no longer about observing madness, it was about being consumed by it. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Sleep deprivation, hallucinations, and paranoia gripped the participants. They became shadows of their former selves, their minds fracturing under the relentless pressure of isolation.
Mark, the writer, fell silent. His journal entries ceased abruptly, replaced by disturbing sketches of eyes peering through cracks in the walls.
Sarah, the artist, began to mutilate her own artwork, convinced her creations were tainted by the unseen presence that haunted her.
John, the soldier, transformed into a prisoner of his own paranoia. He barricaded himself in his room, using his furniture to construct a makeshift fortress against the imaginary enemy he believed was closing in.
Emily, the grieving mother, retreated further into her delusion, believing the facility was a purgatory she must escape to reunite with her child.
David, the scientist, became obsessed with the ventilation system. He believed it was the source of the whispers, the music, the unseen force that tormented them all. His final journal entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, sent shivers down the spines of the research team. It's not isolation we should fear, but what we invite in when we believe we're alone.
The words hung in the air long after Dr. Taylor finished reading, a chilling premonition of the horror that was to come. Day 28. Contact with Emily was lost. The camera feed from her room went dead, the screen replaced by static snow. When the team breached the door, they found her room empty. The only sign of her presence was a single line scrawled on the wall in what appeared to be blood. He took me to her.
Panic set in. The experiment, once a controlled study, had spiraled into a nightmare.
Dr. Taylor, her face etched with fear and guilt, ordered the immediate termination of the experiment and the evacuation of the remaining participants. But it was too late.
On day 29, John's barricade was breached. The camera captured a fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure dragging him from his room, his screams swallowed by the cold, sterile walls.
Mark's room yielded nothing but a single shattered camera lens, the feed cutting out just as a pair of glowing eyes filled the screen.
Day 30 arrived, the designated end of the experiment. Only David remained. The team watched in horror as he ripped apart the ventilation duct in his room, his face a mask of terror and desperation.
"I can hear it!" he screamed, his voice distorted by the static-filled microphone. "It's here! It's been watching us all!" Then silence. The feed cut out, plunging the control room into darkness. The isolation experiment was over, but the horror had only just begun. The investigation revealed nothing. No sign of forced entry. No trace of the missing participants. The facility, once a beacon of scientific inquiry, now stood as a chilling testament to the depths of human despair and the terrifying power of the unknown.
Dr. Taylor, haunted by the fate of her subjects, pored over the data, the video footage, the fragmented journal entries. She was looking for an answer, an explanation, a way to rationalize the horrors she had witnessed.
In David's final journal entry, she found a clue. Amongst the frantic scribbles and equations, a single phrase stood out: the Watcher, born from fear, sustained by isolation. It was a concept David had been exploring in his research. The idea that fear, under certain conditions, could manifest into a physical entity. An entity that fed on isolation, on the unraveling psyches of those unfortunate enough to cross its path.
Dr. Taylor realized with a sickening certainty that she hadn't been studying isolation. She had been cultivating it, creating the perfect environment for something terrible to take root and flourish. The isolation experiment had yielded no scientific breakthrough. It had birthed a nightmare.
The facility was sealed. Deemed a biohazard zone, it stood as a stark reminder of the darkness that lay at the edges of human understanding. Dr. Taylor, her career in ruins, disappeared from public life, haunted by the faces of the participants she had condemned to their fates. Whispers of the isolation experiment lingered. Rumors spread through the dark corners of the internet, fueled by grainy security footage and cryptic journal entries leaked by unknown sources. Some dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. Others whispered of government cover-ups and secret experiments gone wrong. But a select few, those who had peered into the abyss of isolation themselves, knew the truth. The Watcher was real. It lurked in the shadows, drawn to places of fear and loneliness. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not born of flesh and bone, but of the darkness that resides within us all. And it was waiting for the next unsuspecting mind to unravel, the next soul to succumb to the siren song of isolation. For the Watcher fed on fear, and it was never truly alone.